Hey there, Tracy Lizotte here, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to paint the white seafoam in a wave. I was at the beach recently and took a ton of reference photos, and I narrowed them down to just two references. This one here, and then this one with the seashell in it. I just love how you can see the little bubbles and the foam and how it contrasts against the color of the sandy beach. And I'm going to create my painting on 300-pound hot press Arches watercolor paper. And this is going to be a small painting. It's only 5 by 7. But remember, you can create your painting any size you want. If this is the first time creating seafoam, I do suggest keeping your painting small. It's manageable. And I want a focal point in my painting, which is why I'm sketching out this little seashell. I'm making sure I know where the shadow goes, and I want to know where the sand is in the shell and the shape of the wave that's against the beach. Those other lines that I'm putting in the wave, don't go overboard. I'm going to end up erasing them. Now I'm only going to use 4 colors for this painting: Sepia, Burnt Sienna, Payne's Gray, and Viridian Green. And I'm going to start off by mixing up some Burnt Sienna in with my Sepia, and I'm going to paint the sand. Now I recommend wetting this whole shape down first. Don't do what I did. I jumped right in with some paint with a small brush, and I quickly realized, oh no, I'm going to have a lot of funny brushstroke lines in the shape if I don't switch up to a bigger brush and add a lot of water to the shape. That way, all I have to do is drop in the color, and the color will spread throughout the whole entire shape and create a nice, interesting texture that'll lay the foundation for creating the sand. And there's also a little bit of sand in that little seashell. This is like a fun shape to paint. And once you're done painting the first layer of the sand, we just have to let it dry. So we're going to switch gears and start painting some of the shapes that we see in the seafoam. So we're going to start actually by painting the darker shapes that we see in the seafoam. Now, we're not going to the very darkest shape we see, but we're not going to start painting with the super, super light colors. We're going to establish where the sand is shining through the seafoam. So it's the area of the wave that is the thinnest, right? So this is the area of the wave where there's the least amount of seafoam, and we can see through the water and we can see the sand underneath. So that's what we're trying to establish right now, which means I want you to look over at the reference, and you can see in particular I'm looking at the reference with the seashell in it, and I'm looking at the shape of the sand that's showing through the water, and I'm trying to establish that shape. Now, it doesn't have to be perfect. You want to look at the little dots, the little circles, and there's a lot of them that overlap each other and they build up, and they end up creating shapes that almost look like half moons in those type of areas. And as you use up the paint that's on your brush, the color will become lighter and lighter, and you want to go and use that to create some of the lighter bubbles that you see in the seafoam. You'll notice when I paint the larger circles, I don't completely fill in the whole circle with paint. I leave a shape in the circle, and that represents the little white highlight that I see in the seafoam bubbles in the references. So keep looking over at those references. You're going to see shapes. And again, we think the bubble should be light, but it's the opposite. The bubbles have the color, and the white is the shape that's all around the bubbles, which is why we don't need to use masking fluid here. We're going to build up the texture of seafoam by painting in these little circles. So you can either paint in a solid circle, and when you overlap them, that's when you create like these half moon shapes. Or you can paint a circle and just put a little bit of color in the circle, and that just represents a highlight. So any white left over is a highlight in the circle, and when you step back, it makes sense to the logical side of our brain. So really, this is all we're doing over and over again, is we're creating these little circles that overlap each other, from tiny little dots to larger bubbles. And the shapes we're painting don't have to be perfect circles. So keep looking over at the reference. You're going to see a variety of shapes. Some of them are going to be round bubbles, but there's a lot of shapes there that they're just organic shapes, and it's the shape of the sand that's showing through. And then we build up some of the circular bubbles on top of those organic shapes. So it's really important that you keep feeding the art side of your brain information by looking at the shapes you see in the seafoam in the reference. Now, The other really super important thing you need to do when building up these shapes is have the appropriate amount of color on your brush. It's really important that you water down these colors and you paint a really light value. If you need to, use a lifting out technique, have a paper towel in your other hand and be ready to dab at your shapes if it seems that the pigment is too strong. It's really, really important that you build up very light shapes. In fact, the lighter the shape is, the more gray there needs to be. So you'll notice some of my bubbles are cooler in color. I have tinted my brown with Payne's gray. So anywhere where the color seems to transition to a cooler color, I have added more Payne's gray to my sepia. And anywhere where the color seems warmer, I have tinted my sepia with my burnt sienna. Now I'm going to use a lot of Payne's gray with just a little bit of sepia for those darker shadows that I see inside the shell, underneath the shell, and also under the edge of the seafoam. I'm also going to make that pop with this Payne's gray. Then I'm going to go back in with just plain water, and I'm going to soften the outside edge of all these shapes. Just add a little bit of water underneath the seashell and the seafoam. In fact, I want the shadow under the seafoam to have kind of an unevenness to it. So you can see there's some areas where the seafoam shadow is darker than others. So that's something I'm being mindful of. If you need to, you can go in and either add water or use a lifting up technique to soften the shadow a little bit. So either will work, but you do want the seafoam to pop and the shell to pop. So it's important that you create contrast with that shadow. Once you're satisfied with the shadow, it's time to create the texture of the sand. This is so much fun. We're going to use a splatter technique, and I highly recommend cutting out the shape of the seafoam with regular paper to protect it. And the goal here is to keep splattering from different angles. Do you notice how I keep changing the direction of my splatter? That's how you get that really random look with the splatter that will create the texture of the sand. You also want to change up the color and value of the browns that you're using in your splatter technique so that you create a variety of colors that you see in the sand. Okay, now that we have all the color, value, and texture of the sand established, we can go in and finish off the seafoam color and texture. So let's go look at the darker shapes and ask ourselves, where does it need to be darker in the seafoam? Where is the sand showing through the water? Where do we need to put any of the darker values? So we're trying to establish the darker values in the seafoam, and obviously the lighter values are just the white of the paper. So anywhere that it's white, we don't want to put any marks. So that's really important not to go overboard in our seafoam. We do want to have areas that are very light and white. We want to preserve those areas, but go in and ask yourself, are the darker areas in the seafoam dark enough? Are there enough shapes? Is the value dark enough? Again, don't go overboard. You don't want to go too dark. So keep looking at the reference and compare the color and value that you're using with that of the reference. Now, the last thing I'm going to do in my painting is I'm going to dry brush in some texture to look like water. And when I do that, I'm going to add some of my Viridian green. It's a very strong color. I love this color, but you need to add a little bit of brown to it. So we're going to take the Viridian with a lot of water and a tint of brown, and we're going to drag our brush across any areas that we want to connect our shapes, and that's going to look like water, and it's going to look like a lot of the brown of the sand shining through our water. This is a beautiful tint that we're going to give our seafoam. And before you do this in your painting, definitely practice it on scrap paper first so you don't go too strong with the color. It needs to be light and transparent. You want a lot of the white of the paper to show through. It's not going to take much. And remember to step back and look at your painting with fresh eyes. You're going to love how the shapes emerge from this painting strategy. And if you need any help, you know you can always find me in the community forum. Hi, I'm Tracy Lizotte, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Now, if you're an artist that's looking to develop your abilities to create realistic, original watercolors, then I have a workshop I think you're really gonna like. Click the link below this video and sign up for my free workshop on how to create realistic, original watercolors. Now, in there, I explain how you can join my art academy, where you can work with me directly, and I help artists at all phases in their art journey, from beginner on how to draw to advanced watercolor strategies to even how to market and sell their art, should you want to learn. Now, if you want to work with me directly and get unlimited access to my help, it starts by clicking that link and signing up for the workshop. And you want to do so while it's still free, because it's only free for a limited time. I hope you sign up, and I hope one day to see you in my art academy. But until then, I hope you keep creating.